many, many characters of all kinds. We had a little settlement outside of the Medford Water Company, what we called the Standpipe. We had Charlie Boy Anderson and Squirrely Newman and Baldy Simons and many more that were really characters in Medford. They would go uptown to Braddock's Hotel, and old Charlie Braddock was a pretty smart old guy. He went in there and he bought them their first drink, and whatever the money they had, he had it when they left back to go to the Standpipe. He had it. That's a true story.
Doc Betts was a character. I don't follow accidents, but I got caught behind one down the Marlton Pike. And pretty soon the ambulance and the fire engine came down there with their sirens blowing, and one man was cut up pretty bad. But Doc went over, he wasn't hurt, he was just cut. The glass cut him, and his wife was sobbing. Oh, she was having an awful time, and Doc told her, look, he's not hurt, he's just cut, that'll be all right. And she gave one sobbing. He smacked her 2 or 3 times, and she stopped.
Another character was Jay Frank. He was a barber, and he had a barber. His barber shop was right near the old Indian Chief Hotel, across the street in the Jennings building. He was really quite a character. He'd start cutting your hair and go out and talk to people on the sidewalk, and he might leave you in a chair half cut for 25 minutes or 30 minutes. He did it with me even. But he was a character. He was quite witty, and the things he did those days you couldn't do today.
I couldn't describe Bill, you'd have to know him. But he was our garbage man for years and years. And he had a little old truck, and if it hadn't been for Phil Minchin, who worked for Lamb's Garage, I think Phil kept him in those old trucks. But he was always breaking down, he was always running out of gas, he didn't have a dime. He'd take care of your garbage for a week for a quarter. You had to wrap it up for him, but then he would put paper back in your trash can. Where he took it, I don't know. I should know, but I don't. But he got rid of it somewhere.
There's no telling of how many stories there are out there in the nooks and crannies of the brains of these old-timers that you can bring out, and which bring out the color of the history. Youngsters, for instance, love to sit down and hear stories of the past. We think of the old-timers as the area's attic of the past.
Years ago, I played in Culture Hall. Yes. Years and years, 1938, 39. They used to have dances there on Friday or Saturday night, and I would play there, and we would get paid by how many people came. I think we made 75 cents. Each guy in the band made about 75 cents. Yeah. It's a long time. We played with Charlie Aceto. I don't remember if you know Charlie Aceto. It was Charlie Ace and the 4 doctors, or 10 doctors. That's what he called it.
I was just looking at my high school yearbook, Collingswood 32. In the back is an advertisement for Medford Lakes Log Cabin Lodge. Phone, Medford 22.
Right. So I moved to Medford Lakes, got married, fell in love with the area. So I wanted to put a music school in Medford. And my buddies and my neighbors from Medford Lake said, oh my God, Frank, you'll never make it. You're crazy. You got 4 strikes against you. You're a Catholic, you're Italian, you're a Democrat, and you're a musician. Never will you make it.
I admit that's 4.
In other words, we want to be able to document later on what went on in the past, where we came from, where we are, and hopefully then we'll know where we're going. Folklore can be very helpful in documenting a town's history, her past, and oral history can be just as important as documented history.
Most people know about Everett Mickle and his marvelous collection of old pictures of the town, but Everett was also a collector of archaeological specimens. And when they would excavate for the basement of, say, the medical building, Everett would be around when the excavation was going on. And after heavy rains, he'd be there, and he had wonderful Indian artifacts. Because the Indians went through this area. Stokes Road was an Indian trail. When the Indians were going through, they were allowed to sleep in the various barns on the property. And when they would leave the next day, the lady of the house or the gentleman of the house would find a deer or something outside that had been left for them by the Indians.
Medford had several mills. because it had such a good amount of water and tributaries all leading to the Rancocas. We had Busby's Mill, we had Bounger's Mill, we had Braddock's Mill, Etna Mills, Etna Furnace. Behind me is the site of the first mill in Medford. Daniel Oliphant started this mill in 1685. It remained in the Oliphant family for several years. Probably the most important figure in terms of mills, grist mills, ironworks, would be none other than Charles Reed. Charles was born in Philadelphia of a wealthy family. In 1763, he moved out into the Upper Evesham district, and what is now Medford Lakes. He started a mill there we call Etna and Etna Furnace. He did a great job. His son took on where he left off, and then after Charles Jr., the mills were sold down to different families. Braddocks and Brannans and Busbys and different ones bought different mills.
The Quakers all married Quakers, and so you have an interrelationship through all the families. There was a split. Someone came along named Elias Hicks, who had some other ideas about Quakerism. That's why we have here in Medford Township two Friends meeting houses. The one on Union Street was the Orthodox. The one on South Main Street or South Street is the Hicksite Friends meeting house.
You have to realize that these people were enjoined from fighting by their beliefs, so it was quite a dilemma for some of these people. These Quaker farmers around here, a lot of them were large landowners. They had a lot at stake. And some of them became Tories, some of them left here, some of them went to Canada. But they did play a part, but it wasn't too often many that actually fought. Adonijah Peacock was a blacksmith. The story has it that he sent a load of green gunpowder to Valley Forge for Washington's forces. And they rejected it and sent it back to him. He brought it home, and apparently he put it too close to his stove to dry this gunpowder out, and of course exploded and of course killed him. And he's buried out at the Peacock Cemetery out near Cherville.
And the blacksmith was the person in any community, one of the first to come in. And the blacksmith made the tools that you needed. The tools you needed for your kitchen, the tools you needed for the farm. You could put a new edge on your plow, you could make your plow, you could make the harness parts for your horses. And in colonial America, the English restricted the import of steel. And they did that so they could control the making of guns and things that could be used in the Revolution. But there are very few working blacksmiths other than in things like Kirby's Mill and other places like this. The Renaissance fairs have blacksmiths that go and travel there because they make wares that people will use.
Rundown mill being restored, and incidentally you might have noticed that very colorful sign that's on the side of the storage barn that was replaced or redone to its original condition, and that advertised Medford and the mill and the flour that was milled there.
Today, the mill, I understand, could be ready to grind grist within a day or two because the mill has been fully restored. Kirby's Mill is the most visible historical site in all of Medford Township. Many functions go on there throughout the year. The biggest of one being in the fall, the Apple Festival.
I think it's about the major event for Medford each year. Each year we get a bigger attendance, between 20 and 30,000 now.
In 1847, Medford broke away from Evesham Township. Was done by the state legislature, and set Medford up as a township on its own. The center of Evesham Township at that time was at Crossroads, which is at the corner of Route 541 and Church Road. The township met in that area called Crossroads.
Well, behind me is probably one of the most visible historic sites in Medford Township. And that, of course, being the Indian Chief Hotel, built about 1810. This hotel was a very important stagecoach stop during the 1800s and even into the early part of this century. It was run first by Samuel Hartman and later by Stacy Kirbright for many, many years.
This house is the oldest house in Medford Township, and it's the oldest house in the county on original foundations. Several people have seen the ghost in broad daylight. It's been interesting. My husband was putting a hood up over the stove one Saturday, and he looked through the doorway into the dining room and thought, oh, she's home from the Acme. And then he thought, she didn't wear a long white dress to the Acme, and put down the hood, and by then she was gone. And the door to the attic is often opened, and neither one of us have done it. My ancestors were from Medford. My grandmother was the last one in the family to be born here, but all the way back for hundreds of years, they were all from this area, on my mother's side of the family.
In 1861, when the war broke out in the South, Medford had several volunteers, but most of the people in Medford at that time were members of the Quaker Society. So in their stead, Medford paid a sum of $300 per person for someone else to fight for them. And this debt was one of the first major debts that Medford ever incurred, and they didn't finally pay it off until about 1900. The Underground Railroad in Medford was a movement of black slaves from the South. The whole Philadelphia area at that time were involved in the abolitionist movement. These members of the Society of Friends were greatly involved in this movement.
James Still was called the Black Doctor of the Pines. We were a Quaker community, and it didn't matter that Dr. Still was black. And Dr. Still was readily accepted by 99% of the people. And Dr. Still did use herbs and things like that. He had his children educated. His son was the second black to graduate from Harvard Medical School. Dr. Still used to have family reunions at his property here on Church Road, and the Still family to this day have family reunions, and they have hundreds of relatives who come.
The history progressed, of course. The modes of transportation changed. First the horse, then the horse and buggy were the only means. Later, then along came the railroads, and that became the main transport between Mount Holly and Camden.
All the farmers in Medford at that time used to run down to Kirby's with their milk and make sure they got on the train to go to Philadelphia or Camden. The railroad played a major role in the development of Medford.
The youngsters that were going to school in the early 20s, they took the railroad to Mount Holly to attend high school.
If you stand on the north side of that doctor's station and look directly west, you're looking right down Route 70. Route 70 is on your railroad track.
This is one of the oldest field trial clubs in America, starting in 1906. Some very, very famous dogs and some very famous people have been up on this hill enjoying running dogs. Clark Gable's dog, Cameo's Red Rocket, won a national championship here in 1958. John Gaines was a member here from the Gaines Dog Food Company. 1913, they run a $1,500 steak here called the Pabst Blue Ribbon Steak, and Gustav Pabst was a member of the board here. He put up the money. That was twice the average salary of a man at that particular time, in 1913, $1,500.
I went up there At the time of my life, just sitting there, not saying a word, just looking at Ty Cobb and Cy Perkins and those fellas. They were sportsmen and they were bird dog people. When I was a kid, Saturday night was it. Farmers were nearby, shall I say, the hundreds, but that was the night when they came to town. Where the collective bank is now, that was Bill Potts Ice Cream Parlor. On a Saturday night, you couldn't get in there. The people were jammed to get in the ice cream parlor. They had a big wire frame they put up, and they played basketball in there after the movies. Of course, the ceiling was very low, and some of these guys would take a long shot and hit the ceiling. So, but we had a team, very, very good, and they were all little. They'd have teams come out here from Camden and down from Trenton and whatnot. You know, these tall guys like 6 feet, 6'2". Our men were 5'6", 5'7", but they were fast. They were like greased lightning.
In 1857, Mr. Thackeray and Mr. Gager built the old schoolhouse, the one-room schoolhouse called Cross Key School, which is located on Mill Street behind Memorial School and Haynes School. Betty Trumbauer was head of a group in 1980s that decided to restore the schoolhouse to its present condition. And we have in there, we do have the pictures of some of the classes in the past. We have the report cards of some of the students, particularly Ed Gager, who is still in town.
This school bell that I have in front of me belonged to Sally Davis. Her contract started in the fall of 1912, and I think it was for like $600 a year to teach, and of course she wasn't allowed to get married or anything like that. Some years ago, my mother, being in the antique business, purchased some items, and this was one of them, and she asked the man where it came from, and he said, well, that used to be in the Cross Keys School. And so my mother took it home and she gave it to my father. And she said, did you ever see one like this? He said, well, my, he said, that's just like the one I used to ring for Sally Davis. She said, well, that is the one. It's been here ever since.
I don't know of anybody in this part of the country that was more respected or more trusted than Ed Reeve. My father didn't do much trading in stock, but he'd take stock certificates up to Ed and say, Ed, I'd like to sell this. And just give it to him. He never got a receipt. And Ed would sell it for him with the money in his checking account. That went on for years. Everybody trusted him. The bank examiner, Ralph Darr, remembered reading or hearing about somebody dying. And going through the notes, examining the notes, he saw this name. Then he went to the board of directors, and they checked all of the notes. The bigger half were people that had died. And when it broke that he finally embezzled all of this money, he just knocked the town back on its ear. It was a very, very strong bank. And the bank was able to withstand that loss and come back and operate. That was in 1928. And in 1930-33, when Roosevelt was elected, the bank holiday, all banks closed for 4 or 5 days. Medford was one of the first to reopen. It was that strong. Well, Rogers Brick had bogs. Wills had bogs. All in this general area. Most of the lakes you see today are bogs. Medford Lakes were bogs. The Medford Lakes was started by a man from Texas. He had a man up here, now I know this because I talked to the man. He sent a man up here from Texas named Hugh Eckert. And he was the guy that dredged the bogs, the lakes, and the bogs and made lakes out of them.
In 1927, Leon Todd, a developer, came to the Medford Lakes area. He flew over this property and he surveyed it from air. And he thought, boy, what a great place to have a little community. So in 1927, he formed the Medford Lakes Corporation and started to erect homes. At first, it was just a summer resort, and then, of course, it became a year-round place for people to reside. Medford experienced the worst flood. It rained and rained. It's a devastating thing for Medford. A couple people lost their lives in that.
It was over Labor Day in 1940. The dam up at Braddock's Mill, all the way up the far end, went out.
Present day Harriet's was completely underwater. The original buildings there were all swept down Haynes Creek and destroyed completely.
And Braddock's Mill flooded into Centennial. And then Centennial went out, down through Taunton,
Lake Pine, right on down through this lake that we now call Oakwood. All these dams broke and Medford was flooded.
It took everything. During the 30s, they made progress, but very, very slowly, because coming out of the Depression, there weren't too many people with that kind of money that could be up there. And Medford was more or less the same way. But then after the war, an awful lot more people were thinking about leaving the city and find a nice country place to live. And that's when the construction and the population of Medford started to boom.
The McHarg study was an environmental study done for the township. Various people worked with Ian McHarg on this study from the township. Medford Township was the first community in the country to have anybody do an environmental study like Mr. McHarg did for Medford. I do wish we had stuck a little bit more to the results of his study.
One of the major concerns that I have, being a long-time Medford resident, my family goes back in Medford history for generations and generations, is the dwindling open space.
I would like to see more preservation of not just farmland, but more preservation of the buildings. He was an attorney in Camden before he opened his office here. He originally was from down toward Echelon Mall, because that's where he was as a child when he was hit by the train and lost his leg. That's why he had a wooden leg.
When Morris Haynes was mayor, Eve was solicitor, the township attorney. Morris just got in very, very poor health. So Eve was sitting back of him, when Morris wanted to hear something or know something, he leaned back and asked Eve, and Eve would tell him. So after about 2 months of that, I said, you know, Eve, if you ran for mayor instead of running out of his ears, I said, we'd be a lot better off.
He was the mayor. He was very active in the Historical Society. He knew a lot about the town, and he cared about every inch of it. Yes, he was helping to put a fire out, and the wooden leg caught fire.
No town just sprang up. It developed gradually. And it developed the characters that were in that town try to reflect the past of that town. It has a lot to do about how it grew and what went on and where it stands as of today. We know now, based on just hearing from the past, what went on before.
Main Street in Medford has changed considerably in the last 100 years. The streets are paved now, the sidewalks are paved. 100 years ago we had blacksmith shops, we had harness shops, harness makers, we had butcher shops. Today, of course, all these things have changed in Medford from what it was.
Tomorrow it will be 150 years since Medford broke away from Evesham Township.
Today is our 150th sesquicentennial anniversary birthday party celebration. Just to tell you about this birthday party today, there have been literally hundreds of people who volunteered their time to put this together. That's the kind of community this is.
We lived here 14 years and we wouldn't live anywhere else.
I really enjoy living here and I hope everybody else does.
We think it's just a great place to live. The mix of the woods, the farms, and the town makes for the very special charm of Medford.
It looks like the town fathers are going to be able to maintain that small town rural heritage and at the same time be a modern community.
I just love it here and I expect to stay here for the rest of my years.